The struggle to keep a healthy relationship with money has been identified as one of the leading causes of stress among couples. Experts often encourage people to be open about the state of their finances and the decision they take in order to avoid any conflict. Now, we'll get more advice on this from Executive Head of Financial Planning at NMG Benefits, Stian de Witt. A very good morning, Stian. Welcome to the weekend edition of the South African Morning. Obviously, we hear that the best relationships in as far as finances are concerned between a married couple in particular is where you guys share everything in as far as the pot is concerned. We all know how much is in it. We all know how much goes out of it. Is that still realistically doable in the current economic climate that South Africans are facing right now? Obviously, each relationship dynamic depends on how the couples have agreed between themselves. But from your expert opinion, what would you advise this morning?
Morning, Will. Yes, I think it is more than ever relevant now. One of the things that we see that's really, really important is that couples sit and discuss a budget, talk about what the expenses are, but also not just share the whole pot, but have a little bit of extra money on the side for each one where you have your own freedom to do and please as you wish with your finances. But the pot needs to be shared in terms of what needs to go in there, discuss that, have an open, honest conversation about what are the expenses that's currently in the budget. And in the budget, we always say you need to have three types of expenses. You need to have obligations, needs, and wants, and discuss that and see where does each item fit into the budget for you as a couple.
Thank you for that, Stian. Obviously, it's never an easy subject to start talking about the issue of money, finances between two people. Where does one start, Stian? Obviously, if the one partner is indebted, this means that we as a couple are in debt, yes?
Absolutely. And I think it's important that you start with what your goals are. What do you want to achieve? Set some goals. And sometimes it's good to come and sit with a professional and say, hey, listen, I need your help. And let's establish some goals, whether it is goals to get the kids out of high school into university, whether it's your retirement goals, whether it is just to get out of debt. Because, we always say to people, if you have 5,000 Rand a month that you pay on debt, the moment you pay off that debt, you actually give yourself a 5,000 Rand raise. And I think that's really important to just give some breathing spaces, get yourself to a place. And again, as I say, we sometimes need to get that objective outside perspective of someone just guiding us in that process as well.
And in as far as just the long-term financial planning for couples or people in a relationship or partners, as it were, what advice do you have, Stian? Should one go at it alone, or should we have a collective goal as people who are in a relationship?
Well, there's a thing we call financial infidelity, and that is where couples sometimes go on their own tangent and do things. And we've seen where marriages are destroyed, where one individual in the relationship go and and incur a huge amount of debt, and then the other one finds out about it 2-3 years later. And we've literally had scenarios where couples were sequestrated because of that. So I think it's important that as a couple, you sit around that, know your personality, know your strengths and your weaknesses, go and set those goals, and then go and say, okay, what is the things we need to do in order to get there? Have a proper financial plan. And financial planners are not only there to sell you insurance and look at your retirement planning, but they're also there to guide you with things like a budget, financial management, give you some tools in your hand that's practical so that you can step forward towards financial success.
And let's unpack that even further, Stian. In real terms, you have a couple. Obviously, there will always be one who brings in a lot more than the other. How then do we make things work for both of us without the other who brings in more feeling like they're taking a lot of the strain in as far as the financial commitments are concerned within this household?
That's a great question, Will. What we've seen is there's always cycles in marriages and in relationships. Sometimes the one brings in more than the other one. So it's important to keep the big picture in mind and say, we're in this together. And, it's like, in your body, you have different roles in the bodily system. The same in marriage, the same in business. There are roles. And the more money you bring in doesn't determine your worth in the relationship between that, saying you're more worthy than the other one. In my scenario, my wife is a stay-at-home mom, but what she does for the family and for my kids is so much more than I can do at some stages. So it's important to understand that worth is not determined by the amount of money you bring in. And then go and sit as a couple and say, this is our money. We need to budget and we need to plan around the pot and discuss that and not just worth.
And of course, some families, Stian, as you and I speak, in reality have what they call black tax, right, that they are subjected to. How would you advise those couples in those relationships that still have families outside of the relationship that depend on their income, whom they also feel a responsibility or a duty to look after? How do they navigate those tricky waters?
Well, I think the most important thing there is communication. Have open, honest communication and also manage expectations. Some families said what we call the sandwich generation. You have to take care of your kids and you have to take care of your siblings and your parents. So it's important to have a look at your own budget. It's not worthwhile driving yourself and your whole family to the ground while supporting the rest of the community. But also, it's also important to know where you come from and what your roots are and how do you support that family. So the first and foremost is communication. Have a practical once a month at least, maybe sometimes once a week meeting and discuss what are our goals, how do we support the family, and how do we manage that. And make sure that the families also know that they don't have false expectations of what they can expect of you and what you can deliver.
And lastly, Stian, before I let you go, in as far as the big ticket items are concerned that partners would want to either purchase together or go into together, what advice would you have for someone who's wanting perhaps to renovate their house or to buy a new vehicle or to go on holiday? Things like that are big ticket items within a budget. You've spoken about how to budget, but let's now just give some financial tips for whoever's watching this morning and are in need of those tips.
The first thing is that you make sure, as I said, you have a budget, but then you also need to go and make sure you have things like emergency fund in place. When you go into big ticket items, make sure you have that insurance. Now, insurance in the sense that it's an emergency fund, because that type of emergency fund is also insurance against fights in the family. Because the moment you run into a very financial difficult scenario where a car breaks down or something happens and you need cash, but you don't have, and now you have this big project on your hands, then you're creating some strife in the relationship. So the second one is, before you go into big ticket items, make sure you have your debt covered. Get away from any unsecured debt. You might have some vehicle debt, you might have a bond, but don't go into big ticket items and big expenses, even fancy holidays, if you still owe credit card debt or even short-term loans. Get that out of the way completely before going into big ticket items, and then budget for that big ticket items. If you are taking out a second mortgage to do that, make sure you have a plan on how to pay it off earlier. If you take your bond, that's a 20-year bond, and you pay it off in 7 years, you cut your debt with a third, or the amount of interest you pay on your debt with a third. So it's very important to manage your debt when going into big ticket items like that.
Stian, thank you so much for your time this morning and those invaluable tips. Stian de Witt speaks for NMG Benefits.